The New Orleans Saints did not make a move at the NFL trade deadline, and honestly, that was the right choice. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Big shout out to all you everydayers out there. Don't forget, you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, breaking news, and much more, you can become a Locked On Saints insider by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints today to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the Media Saints News Network, Tuesdays on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app and create an account. Use that promo code Locked On NFL for $20 off of your first order. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to introduce the Chicago Bears to you, who are missing one of their biggest but yet smallest weapons on their offensive side, how that can work out for the New Orleans Saints. We're also going to be taking a look at why the Saints did not make a move for Chase Young specifically, but I want to start off with a look as a whole of why the New Orleans Saints simply didn't make a move at the trade deadline. And so we're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty pick conversation here in a little bit when it comes to looking at Chase Young, but as a whole, the New Orleans Saints didn't make a move at the trade deadline, whether as buyers or as sellers. They didn't send anybody away. There were all of those, I dare not even call them rumors, but all of that quote-unquote speculation around the idea that the Saints were going to send Jameis Winston to the Minnesota Vikings, that those conversations were happening and all these other things, and that all of a sudden that trade just fell apart at the last minute, and none of that is true. Doesn't mean that there weren't maybe some conversations, doesn't mean that maybe Minnesota called, but I don't know how long that phone call lasted, perhaps from hello to goodbye, and that's about it. But it's not a thing that was going to happen. And you know, look, we talked about that on the show already. So now what I want to look at is why they didn't make any moves as a whole when it comes to the trade deadline. And the fact of the matter is that there's three specific reasons that I outline as to why the Saints didn't make any moves. First of which, they weren't buyers because talent on the roster has never been the problem, right? The entire season so far when this team has been struggling, what's the thing that every person has said? Well, with all the talent they have on that roster, they sure are underperforming, or with all that talent that they have on the roster, they shouldn't be struggling to score 20 points per game, whatever it is that people are talking about at that time. It was always caveated with the idea that the talent on the roster is too good. So if the talent on the roster is too good, then clearly the Saints are fine from the player personnel perspective. And I happen to agree with that. I don't think that this is a team that was really missing anything that they could go out and get during the trade deadline. Yes, they could use some help on the offensive line, but you're not going to find help at the offensive line at the trade deadline more than likely. We saw one offensive lineman traded during this trade deadline, and that was Ezra Cleveland going from the Minnesota Vikings, who was going to be replaced by Dalton Reisner, and then he's on his way over to Jacksonville. But Ezra Cleveland, probably not a guy that the Saints were interested in, or if so, not willing to pay any kind of meaningful price to get him. And honestly, if you look at left guard, the Saints are actually pretty good there. They've got Andrus Peat that can bounce inside. That's your usual starter. James Hurst can play there. Max Garcia has played well there. Landon Young can play there. Like, they have enough at left guard. Now, if you wanted to look at maybe the left tackle spot, sure, but you ain't trading for a left tackle at the NFL trade deadline. Everybody that's got a left tackle that they like is not ready to move on from that left tackle. Everybody else doesn't like their left tackle. So you're not going to get any better at the trade deadline when it comes to that position. So outside of that, the Saints are not in a situation here to where you look at them and say, okay, well, they were that player away. They were that player away. The player personnel conversation has consistently looked at this team in the positive light. And I think that that makes perfect sense. Maybe they could have made a move for Hunter Renfrow, but when you've got Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, and Chris Olave all healthy, there's no reason for that. And sure, you can go and preemptively make that move just in case you have an injury, but what's the point, right? You're not going to do that. You do that in free agency. You might do that, with the free agency market or add somebody to your practice squad, whatever that might be, but you're not going to do that by burning resources. And the Saints don't have a lot of resources to go with. They don't have a third or fourth round pick right now. There's a compensatory fourth round pick that we expect that they'll get from Marcus Davenport. But for right now, like, they don't have the mid round picks that often get moved for the players that will have an impact. So that's one piece. The other piece is when I look at this team, the players that got moved, there's not really any players that were good fits for what this team likes to do on either the offensive or the defensive sides. You saw one wide receiver moved in Donovan Peoples-Jones, not really a fit for the New Orleans Saints offense. And if he were to be traded to the New Orleans Saints, what are they going to do with him? Where is he going to get his snaps? It wouldn't have made sense. If they trade for an Ezra Cleveland, left guard, that's not really the spot where they need help. Right guard, not really the spot where they need help. They need help with the tackles. You're not trading for a tackle at the trade deadline, more than likely. When it comes to the pass rushers of Montez Sweat and Chase Young, I'll explain this in a little bit, but neither of them a fit. Montez Sweat may be more so a fit but Chase Young, not a fit. I'll explain why here in a little bit. So I think that that's the other thing that I look at is that if you break it down, looking at the players that got moved, I guess Rasul Douglas is in that conversation as well. He was traded to the Bills, but Saints aren't really in need of help in their secondary. So there wasn't really a player out there that I can imagine that the New Orleans Saints said, okay, we got to go and target him. Like, the one player that I could think of that I could see the Saints going after outside of if there was some tackle that was available or something like that was revisiting our earlier offseason conversation in wide receiver Hunter Renfrow, who Ian Rappaport said the Saints actually called about or talked to the Raiders about in some capacity, but couldn't come to terms with it. And that makes sense, right? The contract's got like $13 million in its next season. There's a whole bunch of other little knickknacks and things like that complicate stuff. And so I could see how that conversation never really came to a deal. But the fact of the matter is that that's the one thing that maybe might have made sense. And now it just becomes something to maybe watch over the course of the offseason, especially with Derek Carr still in town. The last thing that I'll mention for number 3 is that the Saints have shown all season long, and really through most of last season as well, that they're not really an organization interested in change at the moment in the middle of the season. That once they kind of go into the beginning of the season, within the first 4 games, they kind of know who they are, what the roster looks like, and they're happy with that unless something gets in that way. Like, you have to respond if there's an injury. You have to make a change if somebody is out or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I get all that. But this is a team that didn't want to change its play caller, which was a big issue early on in the season. This is a team that wasn't interested in changing. It wasn't last year interested in going back to its original quarterback in Jameis Winston. This is a team that made a big change over the offseason to Derek Carr, which is one of the reasons why, like, some of the conversation early on in the season about how Jameis Winston was competing with Derek Carr was like never real. Like, this is a team that knows the direction that it wants to go. And once it feels like it's on that direction, even sometimes to a fault, it will stay the course. And that's what the New Orleans Saints decided to do. They weren't going to bring in outside help from, when it came to coaching. They didn't bring in outside help when it came to players and personnel from a trade perspective. They didn't make the change at play caller. None of this is surprising, right? The Saints believe in the roster that they have. And with all of the miscommunication that they've already dealt with, especially over on the offensive side, I don't know if adding a new ingredient to the gumbo would have made it any better. That's the other thing that I would look at here. So I'm not surprised that the New Orleans Saints didn't make a move. And with all of the things that I just listed, it kind of makes sense. But specifically why they didn't make a move for Chase Young comes down to what you have, what you want, and what's available. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. eBay Motors is teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you the best fantasy football advice each and every week, all season long. So whether you're getting ready for that daily draft or maybe you're scouring the waiver wires or free agency pools every week, we're going to provide you the players that are going to be a perfect fit for your roster. So let's see who Vinny has selected as this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit fantasy pick of the week. And this one is a personal favorite of mine. Bills rookie tight end Dalton Kincaid has stepped into a big role with another one of my favorite tight ends, Dawson Knox, getting hurt. So he's gotten it going with Josh Allen catching his first career touchdown pass in week 8 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Kincaid gets sort of that smash spot in the shootout game up next against the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football. And Cincinnati has been much better in coverage on the outside against wideouts than against tight ends over the course of the season. So Kincaid will once again come through for many managers that might be looking for a little bit of a pick-me-up at the tight end position. Vinny Iyer is here to help you win your fantasy football championship, and eBay Motors knows that winning a championship and that a championship team is all about each player being the perfect fit, and the same goes for your vehicle. With over 122 million parts and accessories for your number one ride or die, you can keep your ride running smoothly, whether you need brake kits, LED headlights, bumpers, roof racks, whatever you're looking for, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. And at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, available only to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Why the New Orleans Saints didn't make a move for Chase Young makes just about as much sense as the New Orleans Saints not making a move at the trade deadline at all. And for me, it makes a lot of sense. Appreciate all of you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Now, look, is Chase Young a good player? Probably, right? He had 7.5 sacks his first season. He's been dealing with injuries, 1.5, 0 sacks over the course of the past couple of years. This year, though, he's on pace to top his previous sack high of 7.5. He's already got 5 sacks on the season. The Washington Commanders doling out 11.5 sacks, 6.5 go to the Chicago Bears with Montez Sweat, and then 5 go to the San Francisco 49ers of all teams with Chase Young. So why didn't the New Orleans Saints make the move for Chase Young? They had a better offer. They had a better pick that they could have offered. But I think that the pick that the Saints had to offer was a little bit too good. And it would have been too much to compete with the third round pick that the San Francisco 49ers sent away. Now, the San Francisco 49ers sent away that third round pick. It's going to be a late third round pick, all those other things. The Saints, if they had a third round pick, probably would have been a little bit earlier than what the 49ers sent away. However, Saints don't have a third round pick. They don't have a fourth round pick, right? Because you can't trade the compensatory picks that are earned from players. Those haven't been awarded yet. You can trade the compensatory picks from the NFL's diversity initiative when a woman or a person of color ends up getting hired from, your team into a general manager or into a head coaching spot. You can get, stuff for that. However, that's not a thing for the New Orleans Saints right now. Like that they have no such picks coming their way. They have compensatory picks for players that have not yet been awarded, so you can't trade those yet. So for the Saints, in order to compete with the third round pick that the San Francisco 49ers traded away to Washington, in order to get Chase Young, you would have had to send your second round pick, which remember is not your second round pick, but the Denver Broncos second round pick, which is a really good second round pick at the moment. And even that second round pick wouldn't have been enough to compete with the Chicago Bears for Montez Sweat, by the way, because the Chicago Bears traded away either I think they traded away their original second round pick. So it would have been it's projected to be 35 overall. The Denver Broncos pick right now is projected to be a little bit behind that. So in any case, either you're doing too much to compete for Chase Young or you're not able to compete for Montez Sweat. But why not Chase Young specifically actually makes a lot more sense just from the compensation, even beyond just the compensation conversation, is that Chase Young's not a fit for this defense. Is Chase Young really good? Like I said, probably. Is he somebody that anyone would love to add to their defense? To an extent, sure. Is he someone that any fan would love to have on their defense? 100%, right? Because all of the potential, he's an entirely potential person right now, and everybody loves potential. But there's a couple of things that get in the way. First of all, you'd have to be ready to sign him to another deal, to another contract. You just extended Cam, you just extended Carl Granderson. Where the heck is Chase Young getting his money as well as getting his snaps? And getting his snaps to a point where it makes sense to give him the money. Now, you could have potentially moved, if you had a third round pick, could have potentially moved a third round pick for him, gotten him, used him as a 9-game rental, maybe a rental through the playoffs, and then let him go and sign somewhere else over the offseason and maybe get a third round pick in return on a compensatory side of it. But you're not going to downgrade your almost first round pick of a second round pick that you're in line for right now to do that, right? So you would only really do that if you had a third round pick, and the Saints don't. But even from a fit standpoint, Chase Young is a wide 9 edge rusher. Wide 9, we've talked about, we've broken down sort of techniques here on the show before. Zero tech is immediately over the center's nose. The 1 tech is in between the center and the guard. 3 tech is in between the guard and the tackle, that kind of stuff. Wide 9 means that he's all the way outside of tight ends, all the way out there. And so you put him all the way out there, you let him kind of get this full head of steam, you let him, run the bend, and then hopefully he's able to get to the quarterback. That's not the style of what the New Orleans Saints defense likes to do. They don't do the wide 9, put him all the way on the outside and give him a running start, give him a runway to the quarterback kind of thing. That's not what they do. They're not a speed rush defense. They would have to change a piece of their system in order to put Chase Young in a situation where he can be successful. Because if you put him in the situations where the Saints, in the way that the Saints have Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan and all these guys that play defensive end, if you put Chase Young there, he's going to be erased off the field with the quickness. That's not his game. His game is not, I'm bigger and stronger than the guy in front of me. His game is, I'm faster than the guy in front of me. And so when you end up playing, a 5 technique or a 7 technique to where you're lined up over the tackle in some variation, that's not going to work for Chase Young. You're going to put Chase Young in a bad situation. And we just finished celebrating the Saints for putting their playmakers in position to make plays. Making a trade for Chase Young would have been bringing Chase Young to a system that would have put him in position to not make plays, to be a non-factor on the football field. The Saints have not gotten a lot of sacks this season. I know. The Saints have not gotten consistent pressure on quarterbacks so far this season. I know. But Chase Young actually wouldn't have been helpful for them, because you wouldn't have been putting Chase Young in the position where he rushes most efficiently. You would have been taking away his game entirely and giving up a second round pick in order to do it, and potentially committing more money to him, right? Or at least going down that path where you have to have that conversation at the end of the season. Now, you could slap a franchise tag on it, but that's a hefty franchise tag. Chicago Bears can do that. New Orleans Saints probably don't want to do that. So when I look at why the Saints didn't trade for Chase Young, it makes sense. It comes down to what they already have, which is A, not enough draft capital, and B, a good roster already. It comes down to what they need in terms of, if they wanted to add a pass rusher, they would need to add a pass rusher that's maybe more like Montez Sweat, who's 6'6", but still undersized at 260 pounds, 260-ish pounds, 270-ish pounds. So you'd like to see that tick up. But I mean, he would have been a better fit than the 6'4", 260 guy in Chase Young that can't rush the passer from in front of a blocker. You have to put him over on the outside. And so what you need doesn't match what's available, which is what we talked about. It came down to what the Saints had, what they need, and what's available. Those three things did not marry together, especially in the conversation of Chase Young, slightly in the conversation of Montez Sweat, which again, you didn't have the pick to compete with that unless you were willing to give up a first round pick. Danielle Hunter did not get moved because the Vikings probably are asking for a first round pick there. Saints are not going to do that. So it's tough, but it makes sense. It makes perfect sense why the Saints did not make that move. And I think that the Saints, if they want to go for a pass rusher in the draft, that first and those second round picks are going to put them in position to do that. Now, you got to figure out your offensive line. You might be looking at a rookie quarterback as well, so you can kind of have somebody developing in the background, depending upon how you want to go about that and tackle that conversation as a franchise. So you got a couple things that you can do with that first round pick or that second round pick. But if the right player is there at the second round as an edge rusher, hard not to swoop in and continue to add to that position. But you add to that position on a rookie contract, not on a veteran deal that you have to pay for, either projecting the production in Chase Young's case or paying for the production that somebody had in a different system in Montez Sweat's case. So I get it. I completely get it. All right, coming up next, I want to introduce you a little bit to the Chicago Bears, because they're going to be without a player that I think would have made a massive difference for them. And yes, they added Montez Sweat, but how much will we see him? We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, my favorite place to go whenever I need to grab tickets for an event. I am a spontaneous, last-second kind of guy, and Gametime feeds right into and gives me exactly what it is that I need with that attitude. They allow me to be able to see my view from the seats before I pick the tickets. They've got deals all the way down to the day of the event. They've got flash sales. They've got so much that you can check out, and you can buy tickets in like 2 seconds with just a pair of taps after you get all set up. It is awesome. So let me help you out here. I'm going to help you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. You're going to be able to do that by downloading the Gametime app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $20 off of your first purchase. Once again, terms do apply. Enter that promo code and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with getting to know the Chicago Bears a little bit before this Sunday game. Appreciate you as always, all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to check out NFL Kickoff every Friday here on Locked On Saints and on every single Locked On NFL page. YouTube page, you can find that at 1 p.m. Central Time. NFL Kickoff here on Locked On. All right, so let's get to know the Chicago Bears a little bit. And really, there's kind of like three things that I really want to highlight here. First of which, Justin Fields will not be the starter against the New Orleans Saints when it comes to the Chicago Bears coming here to New Orleans. Instead, that will be undrafted free agent rookie Tyson Bagent. Now, Tyson Bagent premiered or debuted a few months ago, a few weeks ago, had a fantastic game, and then it's kind of fallen off a cliff ever since then. Easy to surprise somebody when you're a guy that nobody has tape on, but once that tape comes in, usually 3 or 4 games, but when you're kind of a pretty static quarterback and all these other things, like they'll pick up on your game pretty quickly. So we've seen the interceptions, we've seen the mistakes, we've seen all those things. The Saints need to take advantage of that this weekend, right? You've got to show him a bunch of stuff that he hasn't seen before. You go back to the sort of CJ Stroud game plan, which effectively worked, right? Particularly in the second half and all that. You go back to that game plan and you prepare for a guy that's a little bit less mobile, but can still move, obviously. But you show him a bunch of stuff that he's never seen before. The things that CJ Stroud has seen before, this kid probably hasn't. So you have a real opportunity going up against one of the best, if not the best defensive coordinator mind in the NFL in head coach Dennis Allen and what he brings to a defense. You got to make life really, really tough for this guy. And there's been some struggles in the offensive line. This is a real opportunity for the Saints defensive line to get back into getting pressure, getting to the quarterback, finishing plays at the quarterback. Again, going to be important here. There's going to be a big play here or there. DJ Moore is the wide receiver for the Chicago Bears, used to be with the Carolina Panthers. DJ Moore is guaranteed a big play touchdown against the New Orleans Saints defense. We know this. It's totally fine. Like they'll get their one or whatever, and they'll get a couple of big plays. But for the Saints, they should be able to consistently handle Tyson Bagent and the Chicago Bears offense. If not, then there is just going to be just fire and brimstone. I can promise you that ain't nobody going to be happy about that. So I expect this New Orleans Saints defense to be in good shape against the Chicago Bears offense. That is aided by the second player that I wanted to make sure that I mention here, which is Khalil Herbert, but it's because of his absence. So Khalil Herbert was put on injured reserve 3 weeks ago. Remember, you now have to miss 4 games on injured reserve, not 3 games, 4 games this year on IR. So that means that he has to miss this game against the New Orleans Saints. So not only will the Saints not be going up against Justin Fields, they also won't be going up against Khalil Herbert. See what I did there? And so that helps you when the thing that you struggled against defensively the most so far over the course of these past couple of weeks has been the run game, particularly early. Justin Fields is a large part of the Chicago Bears run game. Khalil Herbert is an absolute playmaker. So when you're able to when you're able to go up against an offense that doesn't have either of those players on the field, their biggest playmakers outside of DJ Moore are gone. So this gives you a real opportunity to be able to match up and to be able to have a good game. So I expect this New Orleans Saints defense to make things really, really tough on Chicago, and really put kind of a stamp down that says, boom, we're back. This is the defense, all this other stuff. Like, this is a real good opportunity for the New Orleans Saints defense. As for the Saints offense, one of the things that you're going to be hearing about a ton is the trade for Chicago Bears landing defensive end Montez Sweat, who's got over 36 sacks in his career already. Hasn't seen under 5 sacks in his career so far. I think he's already got 6.5 on the season this year. How much is he going to play? Well, he was traded for on a Tuesday. The Chicago Bears aren't going to start practice till today, Wednesday. They'll practice Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They'll have the walkthrough on Saturday, and then all of a sudden, there's a chance that Montez Sweat would be on the field this weekend without missing any practices. Now, how much will he be on the field will be the question. Let me take you back to last year. Last year, the Chicago Bears traded away an asset, Roquan Smith, the linebacker, to the Baltimore Ravens. They did so on, I believe it was November 1st, if I remember correctly, was the trade deadline that year, November 1st. And then he played for the Baltimore Ravens against the New Orleans Saints here in New Orleans 6 days later on November 7th. So now you're taking a day away, right? This is a 4 or 5 day gap instead of a 7-6 day gap. But there's still a chance that he goes out there. It just kind of depends upon what his role is, what he's asked to do for the Chicago Bears and how quickly he can pick up on that. Roquan Smith played that following week, but only played 39 snaps. He would go on to play 50 or more for the rest of the season. So he had a little bit of a reduced role, quote unquote, right? We're talking about 11, 12, 13 snaps reduced. That's about it. And so I think for New Orleans, you should expect to see, or for Chicago, you should expect to see some Montez Sweat against the New Orleans Saints. But how much he plays, what his role is, do they only put him in on obvious passing downs, tell him, all right, go ahead, pin your ears back, go after Derek Carr, all of that. That's probably the role you're going to see from him. So you still have to limit that. You still have to limit that because those are the plays they would be putting him in are plays that become those moments that we talk about all the time, right? The moments that decide a football game. And last week we saw one of those moments as a sack fumble, and the Saints just stacked more moments than the Indianapolis Colts did. You got to make sure that you don't surrender that kind of moment to Montez Sweat and the Chicago Bears in this game, because things can quickly turn tide on you if you do. The Saints have been a much more successful road team than they have been a home team over the course of the past few years. So, just don't want to take anything for granted here. You can't walk into this game and say, okay, it's an undrafted free agent rookie at quarterback. They don't have their best running back. We can deal with the wide receiver. The defense is mostly weak. They did maintain Jalen Johnson, though, so the coverage and rush are going to benefit from Jalen Johnson staying in Chicago and Montez Sweat being added to the defensive line. So you can't sleep on any of this. You still have to come out and be ready to go out there and play your best ball. But to an extent, for New Orleans on the offensive side, their biggest opponent can still be themselves. So you're still looking for them to, come out there, be consistent, show you exactly what it is that they did last week, do it again this week, move the ball between the 20s, go to Taysom and Alvin in the red zone. You can get a little bit more Jamal Williams mixed in there. Don't know why Jimmy Graham was inactive. Maybe that was just a numbers thing. It could have been an illness thing. We'll see. But whatever it is, getting into the red zone and scoring and continue to do what you did last week, that's got to be the most important part of what this team does against the Chicago Bears, aside from just simply not sleeping on the talent that is there. It's not the greatest talent in the NFL, but treat it like it is. Treat it like it is and be ready to go in there and go up against and play your hardest game that you've played so far this year, because otherwise you don't want to lose to a bad team, especially right now. All right, so I appreciate you very much. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. To all you everydayers out there, we'll be live later on this evening after New Orleans Saints practice. I'll let you know what we saw, who was in, who wasn't there, all those things. We'll get into all of that and more. And tomorrow morning on Thursday, it's Crossover Thursday. So Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears will be here, and he'll be able to give us a pretty good indication and level of expectation of how much Montez Sweat we really are going to see this weekend here in New Orleans. I appreciate you, as always, for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.